Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek Show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and with me, as always, is Brian Foster, the man of two nicknames, but you don't get to hear him this week. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, Dre? We took a week off to watch basketball, but it is now the NBA Finals, and the hot takes are flying all over the internet.
Oh, yeah, so to recap, we're a weekly podcast, as you know, but if this is your first time here, we are. We did not go last week, and it just ended up being scheduling because there was playoff basketball every day of the week. And we had this thought. We were like, well, maybe there will be a break, right? Maybe one of these series will end early. And no, that did not happen. We had the first, I can't remember, it's sometime in the 70s, I think 79, 77, it's been on Twitter. But we had the first time both conference finals have gone to a Game 7 in over 30 years. So that is remarkable. And, unsurprisingly, some will claim, but that's bullshit. Unsurprisingly, the finals is going to be a repeat. So that's what we're going to discuss today, just the NBA playoffs and some other tangential topics related to it that might include Kevin Durant and some fake Twitter accounts, but not Kevin Durant's. Let's just hop in. Let's go to the meat and potatoes, Brian. Golden State over Houston. Although, as you know, let's tweet something out. Patrick is back developing. We got a funny comment on the site. We haven't had much content. I tried to fix it. So there's actually an article at the site, a new development at the site. We appreciate the patience. You know, the last couple of years have waned a little, but maybe with newfound enthusiasm we'll have more. And the exciting news is Patrick has the wins produced numbers for the 2017-2018 season up. We're pretty sure on these. You know, we're still making sure the numbers work. That's why it's only 1 year. Always subject to change with things like, position as we adjust it, and just making sure all the numbers are correct. The playoffs are a bit different than the regular season. But, I would say this is a decent start. And we're going to show something surprising, Brian, if you go there, which I'm sure you've done.
Oh, yeah.
Sort by wins produced. The number one player in the playoffs right now is LeBron James. And what makes that even more remarkable, Patrick, very similar to the regular season, if you don't know, has a controller for minutes played. And at this point, it's about 80, because essentially the final controller that Patrick has on the normal players tab at boxscoregeeks.com, where you can look at player statistics, is he tries to get it to about 500 minutes by the end of the regular season. And so same normalization trick. He's saying 80 minutes, which, basically would be one playoff series. And if we normalize to 80 minutes and say the best player on a per minute basis, LeBron James is the second best player behind Clint Capella. The only reason he beats him by such a large margin, 5.7 wins to 4.2 wins, is because Clint Capella played a significantly fewer number of minutes, 520 to LeBron James, 743, despite the fact that they played in a similar number of games. So I know we're definitely going to talk that. We're going to get back to LeBron James. But yeah, playoff numbers are up. Feel free to play around with those. If any of them look off, let us know. As mentioned, Patrick's just started developing again. We're really excited about some stuff. We'll see if that momentum carries, as we've noted in the past on the show, things like jobs, kids, etc. Sometimes get us down, but, maybe, and we'll finally have a playoff wins produced up. And let's talk about that first one, Brian. By the numbers, Clint Capella was the best player in the playoffs on a permanent basis. And I want to address some things that I'm sure will come up. So I'm going to try and get Clint Capella's numbers up in front of me. But why don't you talk about if you were surprised by the fact that he didn't play that much against Golden State?
Yeah, well, so this is a big question that we had coming into the series. In fact, even earlier in the year, we started talking about this, where it looked like Golden State and Houston were the best two teams in the West before Curry's injury, of course, and we're saying, well, how this playoff matchup going to go? Like, what are these lineups going to look like? Are the Warriors going to trick the Rockets into playing small and benching one of their best players, Clint Capella? Well, that clearly didn't materialize, right? Capella is established as a star, I think, in D'Antoni's mind now, and he, played him quite a few minutes, but let's just get all this out of the way at first. When we talked about these two series 2 weeks ago before they started, that is Houston, Golden State, and Cleveland versus Boston, I said these felt like a coin toss to me. Based on these two teams' regular season body of work and how they were playing in the playoffs, who was healthy and whatnot, it was really hard to go any farther than that for me. So it's easy, and I think that ended up being true, right? Both series went 7 games, and you can look at other things like, I guess Golden State outscored Houston by like 50 points in total or something like that. So they probably were the better team in the series, but it was close. So it's, and I was tweeting with Arturo about this today. It's really easy to have hindsight and nitpick when things were so close, right?
Oh yeah. So I wanted to bring up this kind of metaphor, which is in the news right now, which is going on. The Star Wars movie Solo is missing projections despite being seen by millions of people. And a lot of fans on the internet, one way or the other, Star Wars are saying, here's why. This group of people is pissed off. That's why it's underperforming. This group of people is pissed off. That's why it's not doing whatever. And the reality is a movie is a huge, complicated system that has lots of moving parts. And why it does well or does not, there's so many variables that it's hard to pinpoint, that when you start trying to simplify it and say it's obviously this variable, I kind of throw up my hands and say, you have no idea. It's way more complicated. And you're absolutely right. When we get to the point where the last game, the Game 7 of the NBA Western Conference Finals, was 9 points. That's 3 3-pointers between two teams that took a combined, I think, 70. I think it was 83 combined 3-pointers between the two. I think Houston, I believe, took 44 and Golden State took 39, I believe, in the last game. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't remember, but those numbers would not surprise me.
When it comes down to 3 baskets deciding the difference between a team going on or going home, I love your point. And I think that's a great precursor to put before all this analysis we're going to do on this series. Because this series was so close and there were so many variables, Iguodala being out, Chris Paul being out, D'Antoni playing a weirder rotation than normal, all of this stuff means that there is not a clear-cut obvious, this is the reason why this team won, this loss. Because you change a few variables in any direction, and this series can easily go to the either team. I'm actually just happy that it went to Game 7. I'm happy that the fans got that, because that is good for basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Capella, I mean, yeah, we're nitpicking, right? So he ended up, so they gave him more and more minutes as the series went on. He ended up with, I think, 37 minutes in the last game, so that's pretty good. But it's not like he got to 40 when he was playing so well, especially when he was just dominating in the first half on the glass, right? Like he pulled the Rockets ahead almost on his own, and the Warriors had no answer. And I was like, here we go again. The Warriors are going to drink this small ball Kool-Aid to the tune of like 20 offensive rebounds and lose the series, right? Well, things turned around. Capella ran out of gas or whatever, didn't quite get it done. So, but the point is, even with those 37 minutes in the last game, he was still under 30 minutes average for the series. He was at 28.5, I want to say, for the series. So I think that was and you like to say this a lot, right, is that things add up over time. So add an extra 5-7 minutes to Capella, add a couple more rebounds, a couple more efficient shots. Like that could have been enough to tilt the series.
Yeah, so a few things on Capella, it's huge. Okay, so against the Timberwolves, he averaged 31 minutes a game. Against the Utah Jazz, he averaged 33 minutes a game. So if you were, being a projectionist, whatever, and trying to modify that trend as to what was going to happen as the series got more important, you might expect him to be able to play higher. So while him playing 28 and a half, what people might say is conditioning, it is suspect given that we've seen him play 31, 33 minutes in these playoffs already. And I think what you're saying is key, is he was not playing poorly. In 28.5 minutes a game, he averaged 10.3 points, 10.7 rebounds, 0.9 assists, 0.6 steals, and 1.1 blocks. And his true shooting was 66.7%. So what bugged me about Capella not getting more play is, if you want to argue a mismatch, right, which a lot of people do, and when I was talking about Capella, that was what they were saying, is like, well, he's mismatched. How's he going to guard the perimeter? It's like, well, even if he's mismatched, he's playing remarkably well. He's getting boards, which are possessions, and he's scoring points, which are points. So it's kind of like, if Capella's numbers for this series weren't amazing as they were for the rest of the playoffs, I could see making a lineup adjustment like that. But yeah, I mean, let's point this out. Again, one of the things has been on my plate for a while is just to be absolutely satisfied with the wins produced numbers at Boxscore Geeks. And it gets a little hard during the season when we're like scraping sites that change positions and stuff, and it's hard to keep track. Next year, that is one of my goals, is to just say I am satisfied with every year's wins produced, which I thought I was like almost was, and then Patrick's like, what if I had playoffs? So it's like, okay. I'm saying I have not gone through all of these in spot check to be 100% sure that I'm happy, but so I'm giving that precursor, but I'm saying they kind of passed the gut check, which is a thing you've heard me say I hate on the show. But if you look at Clint Capella's points over par in the playoffs, it was 9.1 per 48. Well, you divide that 1 over 9, right? It's not the ball game, right? That's not the series, but that's those 5 minutes a game. That's 1 point a game you were giving up by leaving Capella on the bench with how good he was playing. So it's kind of one of those, like you were saying, it's not the only reason they lost, but it didn't help that they were doing that. And I think another annoying part is that while some of the smaller players on the Rockets, your Eric Gordons and other players that I'm already forgetting, it makes me feel bad. While those players might be closer in matching up in skill to players that the Warriors could play if they went small, like as an example, the difference between Eric Gordon and Nick Young is much, much less than the difference between Clint Capella and freaking anybody, and that includes Finals MVP Kevin Durant being played out of position as a center. And in fact, that was one thing that interested me about the playoff numbers, Brian. I was curious your take here. Despite the fact that Kevin Durant is shooting out of his mind in these playoffs, I think he's averaging like 30 points on. He's averaging 36.9. What's it called? Points per 48 on like 60% true shooting, which is remarkable. Despite the fact that he is doing that, he is, according to us, a below average player, and that boils down to the fact that he's being played as essentially a big, and I think not like doing all the other stuff you'd expect him to do, rebounds, etc. He's like exactly average. So he's an average big because he's being played big. So that's the point. The differential between Capella and Durant in this series was enough that you'd rather have Capella out versus Durant than have Eric Gordon out versus Nick Young.
Yeah, that's right. And all those things are more stuff you can nitpick, right? If the Warriors played McGee instead of Nick Young and had someone to contest Capella, maybe things would have been different. Like, there's so many small things.
Let's go. Kevon Looney and Jordan Bell. These are two young players that have been looking fantastic.
Yeah.
I can get, like, JaVale McGee, I know makes people trepidatious, myself included. Like, I don't know if his knees can handle playing all those minutes. So it's just like, but the Warriors had two fantastic young bigs where, playing them instead of playing their smaller players was a better plan. But, maybe, like, as you've noted, maybe they were baited into playing those. So, like, maybe if they were playing those players, then D'Antoni plays Capella. We don't know. I mean, that's just the amazing part. The boring story that I think you've repeated on Twitter multiple times, so I'm quoting you back to you, Brian, is
Excellent.
You had two of the best teams of all time. And this tracks, right? This season, the Warriors, I believe, by simple rating system at Basketball Reference, this is the strength of schedule adjusted point margin. So it says how many points you expect the team to outscore an average team on an average court in a 100 possession game was like a little over 7 point something. And that's like the 27th best season of all time. That's remarkable. Now, the Warriors are on the second page. They're 138th all time. But the key point, we've harped this season a ton, was Steph Curry. Steph Curry missed 30 games. I added this up today, Brian. The Hamptons 5, which is the starting 5 in the playoffs for Kerr, the best lineup. And the reason they're named this, rehashing you back to you again, Brian, is these were the 4 players and Kevin Durant that all met in the Hamptons to recruit Kevin Durant to come to the Warriors. So that's Steph Curry, Andre Iguodala, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green. A fantastic lineup, one of the best ever in NBA history, I'd have to argue. That combination of players missed 84 games in the regular season. So that's a full player season. So yeah, this team on paper wasn't as strong as the Houston Rockets over the full regular season, but this very much lines up to, say, for instance, the Utah Jazz, where, gonna hurt me to say this, Brian, I'll give him some posthumous credit. Donovan Mitchell was much worse in the starting half of the season than the last half. Now, he was still a below average player at all points in the season, but he was essentially close to an average player to end out the season. So, you could call that. And by the way, all the metrics that say replacement level player in basketball, that player is crap. So not even a replacement level player. He was a player we're fine with. Like Eric Gordon, we don't want as your 5th starter. Donovan Mitchell, we have no problem with as your 5th starter. So Donovan Mitchell, right, improved over the course of the season to, and a fun note, by the way, I was looking this up today. He had a better rookie season than LeBron James is, so maybe he will become a star. So Donovan Mitchell improved over the season. Rudy Gobert was injured like 20 to 30 games early in the season, came back in the second half. So, the Utah Jazz end out the season with, I think, a 4 SRS, somewhere around there. But it's not hard to say, hey, you look at this SRS is misleading because that's excluding 30 games from Rudy Gobert. That's including Donovan Mitchell getting his feet wet before actually becoming a competent NBA player. The exact same is true of the Warriors. They're not a top SRS team like the Rockets, but that's missing 1/5 of the Hamptons 5 aggregate-wise for this. That's missing 30 games of Steph Curry, the only unanimous MVP in NBA history, who still doesn't have an Finals MVP, which tickles me pink. So it's like, it wouldn't be hard to look at those and go, these are 2 great teams. These are 2 all-time greats. The fun stat I was bringing up on Twitter today, Brian, I know you had to enjoy, the current Warriors has to be one of the greatest dynasties ever, and here's the simple metric. From 2015, so that's 2015, 16, and 17, the Golden State Warriors have 3 of the top 10 SRSs in NBA history. That's 3 teams in a row having 3 of the top 10 best seasons ever. That is ridiculous. So, yeah, on paper, you have 2 great teams. Anything can happen. A lot of stuff did happen. And in the end, we got a very close series. And, we're going to have recency bias is like what it's called, where essentially you get lulled into thinking things like the officiating in Game 7 was the most important. Yes, that contributed, but there were things that happened in Game 2 and Game 3 and Game 4 that also contributed to this series ending up the way it did. And the boring answer is it was just 2 great teams and anything could have happened.
Yeah, that's right. And so here's something I've said before on the show that I'm not intentionally trying to make the mainstream fans angry, but this is just who I am. I'm just a nerd on the internet, Dre. You can say, well, this game is like a coin toss, right? And sure, these teams were very similar in the regular season. What I looked at was what was the Warriors SRS when they were healthy and running full steam and looked like they were going to be the number 1 seed. Well, it was very before Curry got hurt, right? Very similar. It was very similar to what the Rockets ended up with at the end of the season. So it was easy for me to kind of say, well, yeah, these teams had a similar body of work when healthy. So then, how do you look at all these different factors instead of a coin toss? You could look at it like Dungeons and Dragons. You could say, what is your regular season, body of work? Well, it's about the same. You guys both start off rolling an 100-sided dice instead of flipping a coin. And then all these little decisions that you make, playing Capella not enough minutes, playing Eric Gordon too many minutes, that was maybe even more egregious. Nick Young, all these little things, that's just going to add 1 or subtract 1 to the die roll for each of those things, right? So it's random, and all these little things matter, but not that much. That's the simplest way I look at it.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to talk a little bit about Eric Gordon because I had this discussion on Twitter today where I was bashing him. And actually, I'm going to put Eric Gordon in the same category as Klay Thompson, which is they are just not a complete enough player for me to be happy with them. Now, the difference is Klay Thompson, and I gave him some major props today. Klay Thompson is an above-average NBA player, probably. I think according to the wins produced numbers, he's always been close to average. And if you probably factor in D, because they've always had a good defense, and it's hard to know how to properly attribute that. But when you factor in D, he's probably an above-average player. Klay Thompson's been overrated, right? We probably wouldn't put him on our all-star squads. Probably wouldn't put him on our all-NBA squads. We probably wouldn't pay him kind of the same money that the Warriors did on the old CBA. But that being said, Klay Thompson I am fine with him. I think the way you phrased it once, Brian, was an NBA pickup basketball game. DeMar DeRozan, you have no problem with on your pickup squad because they're a good player. They're an above-average player. Right. You have a problem with having to pay him that salary. Now, by the way, here's I want to give some shout-outs to the article I wrote today, which is talking about the history of what got Kevin Durant through some of my views. Like I was looking over some NBA history and saying the easy story to tell is that Kevin Durant ended up in Golden State because he was a selfish player that was just chasing a title. And I kind of said there were these other decisions by billionaires that basically set the table that put Kevin Durant in this just very boring position of you have a guy in front of two doors and they go, behind door one is this, behind door two is this, and almost everybody would pick door two. That's kind of my opinion. And we might talk a little bit more on that in a second. But so Klay Thompson is actually on a good contract right now, but he's due up for an extension. So we're kind of worried about what they might have to pay to keep him. But that being said, we've just said the reason we think Klay Thompson is good, not great, is because he's a really good scorer, probably good at defense, but he just doesn't do enough of the rest of the game in basketball. And this is what's key. Basketball is a team sport that isn't just about one thing. And we hear this all the time, right? When you hear people talk advanced analytics, it's a complicated sport with all these moving pieces, despite the fact that it's the most predictable sport of all of the major sports in the United States. And that's true. And so there's a few ways to go about that. You can either be a specialist. For instance, Dennis Rodman was amazing at defense and so amazing at rebounding that the fact that he didn't really take a lot of shots didn't matter. You can be kind of mostly good at everything. This is Horace Grant. He wasn't amazing at any one thing, but he was good at most things. You can be LeBron James, just amazing at everything. But the reason we kind of ding Eric Gordon and Klay Thompson, despite the fact that we'll look at their offenses, we'll say the rest of your game does not compensate enough for your offense. In the case of Klay Thompson, for us to call him a star, he's still a good player. We'd still have him on our squad. In the case of Eric Gordon, he is so bad at all of the other stuff that I can't even give him me wanting to have him in my starting lineup. Despite the fact that, yeah, Eric Gordon had a 57% true shooting in this series, which is fine. But, he turns the ball over, doesn't pass enough, doesn't do enough of the other stuff well enough. So I did want to get that out of the way when you're playing Eric Gordon against Clint Capella. For what it's worth, Clint Capella, when the term you've used before, Brian, that I love is bins of productivity. You can look at the various ways a player can help contribute to winning. Getting possession of the ball, that's things like rebounds and steals. Keeping possession of the ball, that's good at passing, not turning the ball over, good at scoring. Clint Capella is pretty much good at all the bins of productivity. So it's baffling to say, I don't want Clint Capella to play. I want Eric Gordon to play. When you go, Eric Gordon is good at one thing, taking threes. Clint Capella is good at pretty much everything, getting shots close to the hoop, putting them in the basket, rebounding, defense, etc. So I got. It sounds like you're going to say something.
No, I mean, I agree. If you're thinking about the Houston Golden State series in terms of the bins of productivity, it's like, yeah, both teams spent so much effort chasing that 3-point shooting bin that they ignored all the easier bins, right? And I say that because basketball is a zero-sum game, right? So if you're going to put in a whole small ball lineup with no centers and just jack up a bunch of threes, well, you might be able to beat the other team if they're doing the same thing. But it's just so much easier to go for those other bins, which are equally as valuable. Like, we know that, right? We know the wins produce formula, and even others like win shares, they all say the same thing. You can figure that stuff out. You can figure out the magnitude of what a rebound is worth. So, yeah, I mean, a big guy might be slightly slower at rotating on a three-pointer, but is that worth losing by 10 rebounds or something like that? It just really isn't, So that's where that comes into play. And the Warriors almost died on that hill. Like, they kept Nick Young and Sean Livingston out there when they're getting crushed on the boards. And I was just like, Steve Kerr, what are you doing? Like, you're gonna go down over this, but it didn't quite happen.
Yeah, and I mean the in the end. By the way, what I will say, one thing that was making me laugh is this idea that because the Houston Rockets lost, that analytics-driven squads or three-point squads can't win. I find this hilarious, and I'm going to give two comparisons back to back. So obviously, the fact that they lost to the Golden State Warriors, one of the biggest proponents of three-point shooting, on a game where they shot great from three, and also one of the biggest analytics squads out there, is just hilarious. It's funny because we're in a very polarized state with politics in a very tribal state. And I saw someone, I can't remember who on Twitter, but they made just a good observation, which was, they kind of saw politics coming, kind of the Trump wave coming, because they went, I'm a sports fan, and I've had years of people that you cannot convince them Kobe is not a top 10 player, no matter what you do, no matter what numbers you throw at them, no matter what stats. NBA GMs were putting Kobe as recently as, I think 5 years ago on their most clutch players list, despite the fact that the Geeks went out and collected the numbers. Henry Abbott, some of my favorite pieces from him, came out and said, say what you will about Kobe, and I actually came to Kobe's defense after this series of articles. He was like, say what you will about Kobe, he's not clutch. None of the numbers back that Kobe is a clutch player. And my retort was, clutch doesn't really matter because Kobe's played thousands of minutes, Kobe's taken thousands of shots, and clutch is like this much, so it doesn't really matter. But, that's the point. You could not convince people, even with the data, that Kobe wasn't clutch. And we've seen all of this kind of come out in the wash, too, in sports, where you can't convince people. So it's like people are so willing to say, I'm going to bash analytics and three-point shooting teams that I will literally ignore that my team, the Golden State Warriors, and even, by the way, the Cleveland Cavaliers, right, were a few seasons back were like on pace for the most threes in the playoffs, I think, at one point. So it's kind of like people will ignore the very reality of their own side while denigrating it on the opposing side. And then another funny one I'm noticing now is people are going, Kevin Durant has completely tarnished his legacy by what he's doing here, by this decision. I can't believe this decision Kevin Durant made. Doesn't he realize how much it'll ruin his legacy, unlike greats like LeBron James? And I'm just sitting here going, does nobody remember 5 years ago? And I said this a few weeks ago where I was talking about like not to freak out about the playoffs, right? I think LeBron James was in a 2-0 hole against Boston. Sorry, the Rockets were down 1-0, and people were already saying the sky is falling. And I said, we have seen in the last 5 years worse teams lose in the playoffs, upsets happen, etc. Don't freak out over this small amount. And it just seems to me that people do. Sports is a great proving ground for this. People will forget 5 years ago, even if the data is meticulously kept in an easy to look up fashion, which is sports. So in other fields, I'm not surprised where it's harder to look up the data. People forget just as well, but it does make me laugh. And I will just say, the fact that essentially the Rockets versus the Warriors was the NBA Finals. Can we be? Are you comfortable saying that, Brian?
Heck no. I'm way too risk averse, Dre. Arturo's going to put up his projection. I think it's going to be pretty one-sided. I think most people are going to agree with him, but
Can we get the 538 digging now? You know how I love it.
Yeah. I want to go to that next, but I'm not quite that confident. Here's my last thing on that though, before we get into that, which is I think it was you, might have been someone else, tweeted a few days ago, the narrative on Twitter and the media after each game in the series and how different it was. Does that sound familiar? Like game one, the Warriors ruined the NBA.
That wasn't me, but I retweeted that and I love that.
Okay.
It's just basically like one of my favorite examples of this is there was an episode of The Simpsons where Bart and Lisa are playing on opposing sides, and you're watching Homer watch the game, and every time Bart takes a shot, he says, I love Bart, and every time Lisa blocks a shot, she's the goalie, he says, I love Lisa, and he's just going back and forth.
Oh, man.
I've never been able to find like a good GIF of that because I would definitely use that all the time, but that was so much what the playoffs was, where every game the Warriors win. Oh, my God, the Warriors are on their way to just dominating again. Parity in the NBA is dead. Houston comes back and wins. Houston is amazing. Yeah, I agree. Like, just the narrative back and forth shifted so fast game to game that I was just chuckling.
Yeah, so you're looking at the numbers, and it's really hard to draw a conclusion other than this was a dead heat, right? These teams played all these games, like 100 games or whatever, regular plus postseason. Came down to game 7, 9 points. Chris Paul was hurt. Maybe that was the difference. So it's basically just a dead heat. But then what do we have all offseason is basically just that one-game narrative for Game 7. Like, what if it had been a 9-game series? And the Rockets have won Game 8. Would we be having the opposite narrative again? It's way too much into small things.
Well, yeah, we've seen that forever. And so here was the fun thing. When it comes not just to post hoc explanation of what happened, but I notice a lot of people in their models, and I don't want to throw too much shade because I have a lot of respect for Arturo, but I think his model, he says the Cleveland Cavaliers are 99% to win, to lose. Sorry,
right?
to lose. And what's fascinating to me is we have seen lopsided NBA finals already, right? The 3-1 Cleveland Cavalier victory a few years back has to be, when you factor in the 3-1, just as much of an unlikely event. And we've seen that occur in the last 30 years. Now, it's possible that was just a huge outlier that we'll never see for another 1,000 years or whatever. or it's possible that it's more likely for a team to win than we think. And one reason I've said this before about a lot of models that are uber confident about, say, a team making the playoffs or a team winning, you are ignoring the unknown unknowns, which for what it's worth was a big subject of contention in, not contention, but just something that he brought up a lot. In Nate Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise, he brought up just when it comes to people projecting things and predicting things, they leave out the unknown unknowns. This was highly popularized, I believe, by Colin Powell. That's
Donald Rumsfeld.
Donald Rumsfeld
came slightly after Powell, yeah.
Getting the wrong Secretary of Defense?
Of State, yeah, of State.
State? Okay.
Oh, sorry, no, Rumsfeld was Defense, Powell was State.
I'll say Brian is the political scientist.
I'm not I don't quite know if that's right, but maybe.
Brian should know this. I shouldn't point your fingers at Brian if it's wrong. I'm just a noob. But so, yeah. So Donald Rumsfeld brought up the unknown unknowns. And so this happens in every playoff series. We've already noticed this. By the way, I get to laugh at you, Brian, because you said you're not really a prediction, but you just said the Warriors were more likely with their current core to win 0 titles. If you were just and by the way, I'm not faulting you for this. You weren't saying this confidently, which we're about to bash. You were saying kind of the like if we had the bar chart, not bar as in bar, like at the bar where people drink, where you kind of make like those grids of like playoff scores and stuff, and you can pay $10 to get a square on the grid. You were basically saying if you had your $10 and had to pay $10 to get a square on the how many titles will the Warriors win in the next 5 years, you wanted to put your $10 in the zero bin, which seemed completely reasonable. And my take was the biggest factor was Steph Curry. Steph Curry 100% dictated what was going to happen. Steph Curry shot 7 for 15 from 3 in that last game, which was huge. So, when it comes down to it, there was a big unknown that made me go, I can't agree or disagree with your take because until we know how good Steph Curry is, we have no way of knowing that. And that came out. And so a lot of these people, when they're saying my model says 100% for this to happen, you go, you have no way of knowing that in game 2 of the playoffs, Kevin Durant, and the comment I always make is Cool Runnings in that movie, 3 of the top runners in Jamaica. This didn't happen in reality, so it's in the movie Cool Runnings, which is recounting the Jamaican bobsled team, but it's fabricated. Most of it's not real. The real-life Olympians joke about it, where they're like, yeah, we didn't mess up. Totally the sled screwed up. It wasn't us, because that happens in the movie. So this is just the movie, so I'm not saying real life. In the movie Cool Runnings, 3 of the top sprinters in Jamaica, one of them trips, knock the other 2 over, and none of them make it to the Olympics as a result. There's nothing to say that couldn't happen in the playoffs, right? There's nothing to say that in game 2, Steph Curry trips, runs into the legs of Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and those 3 are out, and that's the series, right? We don't know. So I get a little nervous to the exact same point you're making about being risk-averse, Brian. There's so much we don't know is going to happen, and even this last series proved it, right? We didn't know what D'Antoni was going to do with Capella. We didn't know how Kerr was going to respond to that. We didn't know the health of Chris Paul. We didn't know the health of Andre Iguodala. We didn't know how James Harden was. James Harden shot horrendously from 3. If James Harden shot even his playoff average from 3. So here's the fun breakdown, Brian. James Harden is a 36.4 around their career three-point shooter. In the playoffs, though, he's like a 32.4, somewhere around there, three-point shooter, so a huge drop-off. In that series, he shot like 22%. So if James Harden even shoots how he normally shoots in the postseason, that they win that series. So who knows? There's so many unknowns. Yeah. So whenever we get these models out, which, it's become very in vogue with 538, despite the fact that the...
Want to go to that piece now?
Yeah, the runner of 538 came out with the book saying all of the things to do wrong in projections, and then a lot of their projections have those things built in. As I mentioned, people don't notice, but here's the fun one. So that last game where we're talking came down to 3 shots, essentially. As you noted, 538 came out with an article where they said the odds of the Rockets, and for the record, the Rockets have a new record, 27 consecutive missed threes, an NBA record. Amazing. They put their odds at 1 in 72,000. And the comparison I made pre-show to you, Brian, that you got excited about is I said, this reminds me a lot of C-3PO. So for fans of Star Wars, you'll recall a lot of scenes in Star Wars, which was made for kids, by the way. They're very kid movies, so the new movies being dark and whatever. Just remember, you're an adult that liked the old Star Wars movies because they were made for a kid, and you probably saw them when you were close to a kid, and now that you're an adult, you're wanting something else. Tangent for another day, Brian. We can definitely talk Star Wars in the off season, but a lot of scenes work like this. heroes are going into a dangerous scenario. They're going to hit an asteroid belt. They're going to try and save Luke from a snowstorm. They're going to try and battle something, and C-3PO, one of the characters, will come out and say, "Sir, the odds of successfully doing that are 1 in some very large number, usually in the thousands." And then the key response is one of the people would say, "Never tell me the odds." And then the heroes go. And at the end of the scene, you're like, wow, the heroes really overcame the odds to do that. That's one take. The other take is C-3PO doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about and doesn't know how to do odds. Now, I'm not saying 538 doesn't know what they're doing. It's possible. I'm not putting that out there. But 1 in 72,000, you're really telling me the odds of this happening, 1 in 72,000. There's two possibilities. They crunched the odds, and this was a monumental, historic event that we have never seen, or they possibly didn't crunch the odds. And I saw somebody else, by the way, come out with a set of numbers today, I don't remember who, that said something like 1 in 11,000. A lot of people, when they're trying to make these models that are projecting odds, we talk a lot about Bayesian statistics at the site. The key point about Bayesian statistics is knowing your priors. Knowing your priors means knowing the odds of the things coming into the event and how that impacts the actual event. So you made a joke to me, Brian, where you said better update our priors in regards to the NBA Finals because, of course, Cleveland being there instead of another team greatly changes things.
Yeah, this is specifically about, do I still think they're more likely to win 0 finals now that they've beaten Houston? And I said, no, I've updated my priors.
Exactly. But part of the problem is a lot of times when people make models of here's how that would have happened, right? The coin flip is a classic one, right? The odds of getting that many in a row is 1 in X. But that's with the assumption that the coin was fairly weighted. That's a common statistical problem, right? And then you can do statistical tests to say, what are the odds the coin was actually fairly weighted given the distribution we saw? And so that's the other thing. A lot of these models require people putting their own priors, and they use things like expected points per shot. And one of my favorite kind of combinations of data that have come out from people like Ian Levy, from people like Kristen Arsu, great work over at Nylon Calculus, is a lot of the expected points per shot data does not actually line up with reality, meaning just because it was an easier shot, that doesn't necessarily tell us if a player will shoot better or worse from it. Some players like Chris Paul are better at taking harder shots than other players, but just because they took an easier shot. So I'm going to call foul and say I don't think the priors for this study were correct, despite the fact that I will agree the missing 27 consecutive threes was an amazing feat that, I think has to be very unlikely.
Yeah, it was really bad luck for sure. How bad of luck is debatable, I guess, but so we have to go to the eye test here, unfortunately. It's just one game. What else are we going to do? So they were saying in this article that they did consider things like how contested the shots were or how deep they were, because a lot of these shots were way behind the line. And yeah, some of them were open, but some of them weren't. And they were a lot of people are also saying the Rockets were just very, very tired. And I don't know how you measure how tired someone is and see how that affects their shooting. Like you can't really do that, right? But if you do think they're tired, well, maybe that hurts their shooting. So I agree with you, and I suspect that you're right based on watching the game. Those seem like really difficult shots to me, although some of them were wide open.
And so you're a smart ass on the script. You ask if there's any love for the usage curve.
No, that's right. Like they took so many 3-pointers, Dre, and I've started getting to the point where I'm like, okay, well, Patrick likes to say, we definitely haven't hit that point where a team can take too many threes. Let's start taking more and more and see where that point is. I started feeling that way watching this series a little bit with the Rockets, watching them miss all these shots. Now, it's much more likely they just got unlucky, but I'd be interested to hear what you say.
What I think is key, and I mentioned this earlier, is that the Warriors only took 5 fewer threes than the Rockets. And
they didn't make very many either.
Yes, oh, you are wrong.
Okay. Let's check it out.
Look up Game 7 of the series. So what's the split? And you're on all counts. And it's kind of a cheat code because I've been looking over the series, Brian, while we've been talking. So the Golden State Warriors took They
shot well in Game 7, but what about the other games? I'm curious.
Okay, so they had a 3-point rate of 48.8%. That means almost half of their shots were from 3. And they connected on a grand total of 41% of them.
For the series?
No, this is Game 7.
Oh, yeah.
The Houston Rockets had a 48.9% 3-point rate, but they only connected on 15.9. So it's like literally these teams took almost the exact same percentage of their shots from three in game 7. One team shot 41%, one team shot 15. That's just two ends of the bell curve.
Yeah, so game 7, again, this is what it felt like to me. I haven't read any coaching analysis or anything, but it felt like both teams were just taking horrible shots in the first half, and the Rockets were just kind of crushing it on the boards, right? Then the second half, the Warriors wised up, started running their offense again and taking real shots, and the Rockets just kept the isolation going, right? And taking these long contested threes, some of which were open, to be honest. But
what I will say to the usage curve, my opinion on the usage curve has always been, it is not a straight curve. The exact same issue I was having with that 1 in 72,000. What you have to factor in the shot attempts versus effectiveness is how good was the shot, how likely is it to go in, how often, whatever. So to that point, I think if the Warriors were taking a bunch of good 3-point shots and the Rockets, and good being defined by 3-point shots that players on the Warriors traditionally make, and the Rockets were taking a bunch of bad 3-point shots, meaning shots that they don't traditionally make as well, then I'm fine. But I've never believed in the straight number of shots to efficiency correlation, because there are too many other factors that come in there.
Yeah, and of course we're not proposing that there's any data here yet. It just seems to me like that if you do go so far as to just only do isolation and take so many threes, it's a little bit easier to predict what you're going to do. I think people say defense for guarding LeBron James is that you can never do the same thing twice, right? You have to give LeBron different looks when you're trying to guard him. That's just something people say. I don't know if it's true on offense, but anyway, I'm being devil's advocate a little bit here. Okay, go ahead, Dre. You're raising your hand.
Oh no, I was doing the Kobe 5 thing, which is
okay.
But I looked it up. The Warriors shot better than 38% 5 games of that 7-game series. They did have two bad series. They did have 2 bad games, but the Warriors shot very well from 3 that series.
Okay.
I mean, remember we had this exact same thing happen with the Warriors versus, who did they play in the first round? Timberwolves. They played
Spurs.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah. The Spurs were the 7th seed, Warriors were the 2.
Oh no, sorry, I meant to say Rockets. So you answered the question I asked correctly, but I asked the wrong question. So I'll try again. I'd lose at Jeopardy, Brian. The Rockets played the Timberwolves, I believe, in the first round, and they crushed them. They dominated them, and I was like, the series didn't feel that good, but it was the availability heuristic. They had 2 bad games that stuck out in my head, but as a whole, they played very well.
Yeah, it's true.
This series really did boil down to the Golden State Warriors just shot better from 3 and still took a lot of threes. This is annoying. They don't have 3-point rate for the series, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. The Warriors took 225 3-point attempts in this series. The Rockets took 277. So yes, there was a disparity of 53s, but the Warriors were making more of them. So
the Warriors getting their attempts up was really big. To be near the Rock, they were not as. Again, I might have this wrong. I don't think they were as close to the Rockets in the regular season in attempts as they were in the playoffs. So that helped them out.
Actually, this is key to the last point you made that I wanted to talk. You put on the script, is that the Rockets did a funny thing, which is they played like worst team. And that might have actually worked out. Kind of weird pointing. It's too hard to know because they weren't playing Capella, so playing like a worst team was a weird strategy. But, the playing like worst team, they slowed the pace and took a lot more threes, and the data backs this up. But what was funny is...
If you think you're the better team, you want to increase the pace, right?
Well, what's funny is they almost did a funny strategy that almost paid off, which is they made themselves worse, played like they were worse, played a highly variable strategy that almost managed to pay off. I mean, this is one, I will just honestly, this is one for the ages, kind of, with one exclusion, which is I am really bummed that James Harden didn't really show up for the series. Shooting 20-some-odd% from 3 from him, it's just kind of like, it's a bummer that Iguodala, Chris Paul weren't healthy the whole series. It's a bummer that James Harden didn't show up. It's kind of like, we're always fans around here of kind of the best playoff scenario. We're not fans of injury. We're not fans of bad things happening. So it was still an amazing Game 7. Only came down to 9 points in the end. It would have just been fun to see full health. And this isn't anything new for the playoffs. I wrote an article way back talking about Bill Simmons, and he was trying to say a certain playoff deserved an asterisk. And when I looked over it, I was like, well, all the playoffs deserve an asterisk then. You know, we had injuries to, let's see if I can get them, Ricky Rubio, several players before the series started, right? Several players to the Celtics, primarily Kyrie Irving. So we were missing Kyrie Irving,
Gordon Hayward,
Ricky Rubio. I'm not going to count Gordon Hayward because they're in the whole season, but I'm saying Kyrie Irving from the regular season, Ricky Rubio from the regular season, Chris Paul from the regular season, Andre Iguodala from the regular season. It's kind of like we are missing a lot of healthy parts, unfortunately. But that being said, there's still been some great playoff basketball.
Yeah. Let's see. What else on this series? Have we covered it all? It seems like I got a few more things to say, but maybe not.
Well, we'll have the offseason to talk more, and we've got to talk more next week. I will just promote the article. I actually, for the months since there's been an article at Boxscore Geeks Out of Me, I released an article, and it was talking about Kevin Durant in history. And all I wanted to say is Kevin Durant's been playing, as we mentioned, just kind of average this playoffs, but still scoring great, which is, what matters in the primary areas. Has played great in the two regular seasons with the Warriors and was the MVP last season, Finals MVP. I'm kind of bugged by him being viewed as the villain, and the biggest reason being, if you can look me in the eye, please don't actually, if you can tell me on Twitter that you would have been more fine with Kevin Durant staying with OKC when that owner took a team out of Seattle. Now, for the record, we were in favor of that for Seattle because we don't like taxpayers subsidizing billionaires. But regardless, Clay Bennett intentionally removed Seattle from the Sonics, or vice versa, the Sonics from Seattle. He then cut costs to prevent a dynasty, right? I mean, the easy comparable is imagine if after the first finals with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Horace Grant, if the owner had traded away Scottie Pippen. Imagine if that had happened. That is essentially what happened in OKC. So if you're fine with Kevin Durant playing under that owner and not okay with him playing under, here's an interesting point. I believe this is right, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. The Warriors are moving to San Francisco, and I believe at least most of they're paying for their own stadium, or at least that was the case a few years ago when I was paying more attention.
Yeah, they're financing their own stadium. That's true.
So they're in a better market, a more affluent market. They're paying for their own stadium. They seem to have coaches and a atmosphere that people like. So it to me is baffling, and I go over the history of why the NBA and the owners set up the situation where Kevin Durant was placed between, do you want to go play for a small market team under a crappy owner, or do you want to go play for a big market team in a good market under good ownership? And essentially, because of Kevin Garnett, that's what it all comes back to, is the NBA CBA in 1999 limiting max contracts for star players. Because of that decision, they basically made it so that Kevin Durant had to leave $8 million in salary on the table, which might easily have been compensated. And we were discussing this with Kawhi Leonard earlier this year, Brian. There are rumors that his Nike brand is saying, we don't want to give you the contract you want, despite the fact that you're a great player, because you're in San Antonio, which might be pushing Kawhi to go, get me out of here. I want to go to a better market. Give me to Los Angeles, for instance. So it's kind of like the NBA caused the situation, and we're on Kevin Durant's side. And, well, I give him all the feels in the world where it's a tough decision, and being under scrutiny from social media has got to be hard. I will just say I get peeved every time someone bashes him for making that decision when it's a decision many of us would have made in the same boat.
Yeah, that's right. And we've been saying this for years that, it's ridiculous to be saying this about Kevin Durant when you compare to some other industry, right? And Draymond Green said this actually too in the past year or so. If he was some C-level guy at Apple or Google, do you think anyone would have this kind of criticism of him? Never. Of course not.
And one last point I want to get in, and I don't know came through great in the article, but I tweeted about it, is the NBA had this big television deal coming. And I know that they had to have known about it, or at least should have known about it, because Arturo was talking about that forever. He was saying the TV deal, the TV money is going to go up and contracts are going to explode. The TV deal is going to go up and contracts are going to explode. In 2016, 2017, every team in the NBA got a huge boost of salary cap because of just how their contracts worked. And what bugs me is people going, it's not fair that he went to the Warriors, the rich get richer. It's like the Warriors prepared for that event. They actually put contracts in good scenarios on the book and went after good players. And it kind of looked like only a couple teams were prepared. I've argued before that we should be mad. I want to throw out this rumor, Brian, that I've got to research it more, and we'll talk more in the offseason, but there is a belief that Brian Colangelo of the Philadelphia 76ers has anonymous Twitter accounts a la Kevin Durant that he uses to bash the 76ers. But I've said there is one potential out. We were really harsh on Hinkie because we said the process was taking too long. But the out we gave him was we said there was this huge season of salary cap where they might have had enough money to sign 3 stars if they wanted to in the right scenario. And was Hinkie, we were saying Hinkie was waiting too long to sign a star.
Right.
Good veterans. And it's possible that he was saying, I'm going to wait till 2016, 2017 and pull up Pat Riley and sign 3 stars right at once, right? So we don't know. But it seemed like most teams didn't prepare for this, and the Warriors did. So to me, it gets very annoying to go, why on earth did Kevin Durant pick the Warriors? He could have gone anywhere else. And it's like, no other teams prepared. And all of these teams have the same data and information. And so why are we mad at someone making the most optimal decision? It's the same problem we have with the NBA draft. You have these bad teams that don't know what they're doing, and then you give them the best players that are coming out of college, and you go, why aren't they playing better under these bad teams? It's like, well, they're poorly run. So the fact that better run teams beat out poorly run teams is not a surprise, and I'm sick of people being pissed at it because it's been the way it has always been in the NBA.
Those damn triggered snowflakes, Trey. Anyway.
I'm kind of even sick of saying that sarcastically. It is what it is.
Yep.
It's funny. We don't have a ton to say here. Cleveland over Boston. Actually, I do have 2 things I want to get out. First off, LeBron James is incredible. I've been on, I think I tweeted something out about it this week, Brian, where I said something like, I thought LeBron James after his, 5th consecutive final had easily put himself as the greatest of all time. That was 3 years ago now. So at this point, he's just, running up the score. And that is true, by the way. If you look at this, here's a fun stat I found this week, Brian. LeBron James has more points in the playoffs than Kobe Bryant and Tracy McGrady put together. So that's remarkable. And yeah, he's
not clutch though, so who cares?
And he is. I mean, and that's the thing is Game 7 statistics. When we're talking like the Henry Abbott study of actual clutch, LeBron James's Game 7 statistics in the playoffs are huge.
Yep.
I haven't had time to look into this as much as I want, but if we look at when he's the underdog in the playoffs, those numbers are huge, right? The team in 2007 had no business making an NBA Finals. That's the Cleveland Cavaliers. This team is worse than that team. So LeBron James, I'm running out of superlatives to say about him. He is just freaking incredible. And the fact that he got this team to the NBA Finals, Kevin, I'm so sorry, Kevin Love, although it's interesting. Kevin Love missed a few games in the playoffs with concussion protocol, but also he injured his hand at the end of the regular season. By the way, so did Klay Thompson, and Kevin Love has not looked right since. Like in the playoffs, he has just not played as well as normal Kevin Love, and it's actually bummed me out because I think Kevin Love was one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. He just has not stayed healthy enough. It has paid off for the Cleveland Cavaliers, obviously, but that trade was so much better than people realize. And if Kevin Love had just had one fewer injury season than he had, I think people might realize it. So,
but look at the luxury it's given the Cavaliers. They are so stacked with big men, and we always complain about that, right? It's like, this roster is pretty imbalanced if they just had 1 or 2 good guards. Well, now that their best big man is hurt, they still have Tristan Thompson and all these other great bigs to back him up. So, yeah, their roster construction is giving them a little more room for error. That
late season trade though was huge and obviously one of the history now. The other player I want to talk up is Jason Tatum, who I believe let's look him up. I'm excited. I hadn't done this yet, Brian. So let's do it. Please don't disappoint me, Tatum. All right, not bad. Not as amazing as I had thought, but Jason Tatum in the playoffs put up 2 wins produced and played at good level. But he also just played remarkably well, and I actually kind of want to go game by game now because it looked like he was playing better as the series went on. Jason Tatum is the Rookie of the Year. I mean, it just let's see if the numbers back that. This is so awesome, Patrick. I could just sit here and Oh, that's a bummer, unfortunately. It looks like a rookie. Okay, so
The playoff rookie of the year
but
or
yeah,
regular season?
fortunately, and so we were asking you find any bugs or kinks. We just found one. Unfortunately, the playoff rookie filter does not work yet, so that is a shame. But I believe Tatum is the top rookie in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean he's the only here are the players that had a better total wins playoff than Jason Tatum. LeBron James, Clint Capella, Draymond Green, Al Horford. By the way, I get to throw up my hands and say I was wrong about Al Horford. I thought he was old and overpaid at this point. I think he's worth the contract he's on now.
Playing great.
This season alone. I mean, we were talking about this little this week on Twitter, Brian. But the metric I gave is if you're asking if a player is worth their contract, take their wins, take their contract per year. So like if they're getting paid $16 million a year, divide it by 2, and you basically want them at that number of wins in a season. And I argued you can probably include playoff wins because, as Patrick has brought up many, many times before on the show, the playoffs is just free money. An NBA player's salary is for the regular season, and all the money you make on playoff merchandise, playoff ticket sales, etc., that is free money. That's found money. And so, if Al Horford is worth eight wins in the regular season,
he had 8.8.
and then worth an additional 3 wins in the postseason, you can probably just put those together. So, Al Horford is getting paid 13 to 14 mil a season. So by that metric, 27 to 28 mil a season, by that logic, I'd probably say I wanted to be worth 13 wins. He came close to that. And, when you factor in D, it might be a little closer. So he's probably close to the contract. I don't think he'll be worth his contract in 2 seasons, but this season he basically lived up to it. So that's remarkable. Terry Rozier, so heck yeah. Chris Paul, Rudy Gobert, James Harden, Andre Iguodala. So those are the only players that had a better total playoffs than Jason Tatum. That is remarkable. So, and I love this for one reason, because it's regular season. If you want to say rookie of the year, it's Ben Simmons, no question. And then if people say, well, in the playoffs, Donovan Mitchell, which is bullshit, by the way, you just come back with Jason Tatum. So that is amazing. I want to give a shout out to how well Jason Tatum played, how well some of these younger players played.
How about TJ McConnell, Dre? He looked really good for the 76ers.
Next season for the 76ers, TJ McConnell, Ben Simmons backcourt, do the Chris Paul, James Harden thing. When you have 2 distributors on the court together, it is such a mismatch for the opponent. Now, Philadelphia is going to have to work some stuff out, but that being said, I think they're fine.
Think there's too much sunk cost with that first-round pick, Markelle Fultz. TJ McConnell's going to have to move on to Golden State. That's my prediction. No, we'll probably not.
Okay, I mean, this series does deserve more, I think, than we're giving it. Hats off to Brad Stevens for the season he had. The comparison I made on Twitter this week is, losing Gordon Hayward was like a pilot losing their engine at the start of the flight, and then losing Kyrie Irving was like losing their engine with 100 miles to go on their flight. And Brad Stevens still managed to glide that plane onto the runway and just miss the gate. We don't know what the future holds. There's a lot of optimism, and I'm just sorry to be the bearer of bad news, or at least the negative Nancy here. But when a player has a season-ending career, let me say it again. When a player has a season-ending injury, we do not know the impact that is going to have on their career. And while I hope Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving come back healthy, there is no guarantee. So despite all the optimism, we don't know that. And then we've seen this happen before with Derrick Rose, which is obviously the squad they have that went almost all the way to the NBA Finals is fantastic. And even with some standard aging to Jason Tatum, Terry Rozier, Jaylen Brown.
Yep.
Got it right. I always want to say Jalen Rose. Annoys me. Even with some aging to those players, they still have issues with, Al Horford getting older, for instance. And then it's possible Gordon Hayward and Kyrie get minutes and don't play as well. So we don't know, but still an amazing season out of that team. No one that said anything, by the way, any article at the end of the season that says, here's what I said about the Celtics preseason, here's how they ended up, that therefore give me a check mark for being right on Vegas. Bullshit. No one knew this was going to end up that way. That's all I have to say there. I think that's everything I have. I mean, we've talked about an hour at this point, Brian. So I'm definitely good. As we always note, we're coming up to the end of the NBA season, which means come the offseason, we're going to have stuff to talk about. So I don't mind not saying everything in these shows.
Yeah, that's fair. Since we're probably this is the last time we're talking about Boston, yeah, Terry Rozier, pretty damn impressive. I don't know how he's seen out in Boston, but to me, he's kind of been like a Tony Allen type player. Great on defense, pretty okay passer, and doing another great rebounder, but just can't really shoot at all. Well, he's been shooting in the playoffs, so if he keeps this up, yeah, maybe Boston is going to be really, really good. And shout out to Arturo's guy, Aaron Baines, as well. Also played great in the playoffs. So, yeah, great Boston run, but LeBron was just way too good.
Yeah, LeBron is. I mean, oh yeah, and I was going to laugh about that too. Actually, I'm gonna leave the shade alone. I'm not gonna give the haters their day in the sun. We're just gonna move on. LeBron James is amazing. Can't wait to see what he's gonna do. I hope he goes to Philly next season. That's my take. I think I would not mind Philly, and I would not mind Houston. I would prefer Philly because I'd like to keep the East more stacked. Just whatever you do, Bron, please don't stay with Cleveland. You're too good for this. I want to see LeBron in a 9th straight NBA Finals. That Cleveland squad is not going to get it done.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. Maybe they can pull off the miracle.
All right, so let's get to shout-outs. I've got two, Brian, kind of. One's kind of narcissistic, but I'll get to the more serious one first. I got to give a shout-out to Brett Barup, just one of the all-time greatest people in sports. Unfortunately, passed away way too young last week. He did it while reading. Those that are fans of Brett Barup know that he loved wine and he loved to read. He died with a book in his hand, which isn't a surprise. For those of you who don't know, Brett Barup was a top prospect that went to the University of Kentucky at the same time that Ralph Sampson was there. He never made it to the NBA despite being a top prospect, but he ended up being an advisor for many good NBA players, including one of my favorites, Nene, and became a right-hand man in the Kroenke organization. That's the organization that owns the Avalanche, the Nuggets, I believe the Los Angeles Rams, and a soccer team, I think Madrid. Was a huge sports fan, one of the funniest, most well-connected, most well-known people in sports. Everybody that knew him loved him, especially if you were a Colorado fan. And it's just, as you noted, Brian, Twitter, the NBA Twitter sphere was just, wrecked by this news that happened last week. So I was lucky enough to meet Brett Barup at a Sloan. I was lucky enough to get a photo with him at his favorite Dunkin' Donuts on 3rd in Colorado, in Denver. I was lucky enough to call him a friend, and it was amazing. He followed me on Twitter, and those of you that know me know that I obviously am not in this for the attention game, at least the high attention game, the thousands of retweets, whatever. If you look at my Twitter feed, you know that I don't get thousands of retweets. I don't get hundreds of likes. But there would be times I'd throw something out on Twitter, and if Brett Barup liked it, that was enough. That just meant the world to me. So I miss you, Brett. Really sucks. Just got to give that shout out. I was glad to have known you, and sorry you're gone. That's all I got, Brian. You've got any shout outs, so I go for it.
Yeah, well, I'll keep that momentum going and do another rest in peace, actually, from the esports side. John Bain, the Cynical Brit, Total Biscuit was his YouTube channel, and he's one of the pioneers in gaming, basically, in gaming media. He had one of the first big YouTube channels, a pioneer in esports as well. He put a lot of time and money into developing StarCraft and a lot of stuff, and he fought a long battle with cancer, died at 33 years old a couple days ago. So, esports is kind of in the same place as Colorado sports right now, it sounds like.
All right. Well, that's the somber note we get to end the show on. So, I'm just going to lead us out. If you caught us not through the website, you catch us at boxscoregeeks.com. We apparently have articles and new tools for once. Awesome to hear. You can catch us every week. We usually go live at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. We're aiming for Tuesdays, and hopefully the playoffs doesn't get in the way. Obviously, if there's a playoff game on Tuesday in the next 2 weeks, we're not going to go on that. But hopefully, here's the plan. I'm going to try and release an article Sunday night or Monday morning, and we'll tell you when we plan to podcast that week. If you don't catch the live show, you can catch the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote helps us out. And if you want to see, the actual recording, you can catch us on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. Co-host, producer, voice of God, man of many hats. Fine, I did give your 2 nicknames out, Brian Foster. And then, with us in spirit, Patrick Minton, who you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Have a good week, and if you don't, order a cookie.